Thank you very much, Professor Boaz, for that introduction. I won't take up too much of your time. The title of the topic is Destruction and Degradation of ISIS. Is it within reach? And the answer for me is relatively quite simple, is that we could degrade and destroy ISIS, and by we, I mean the international community and all of its enemies, but there is no sign that the political will is actually there at the moment to do this. But there's a third aspect that I want to concentrate on, and those of you who are familiar with my work, I was here last year as well, I spoke on a similar topic, is that I focus on the ideology of these extremist groups. And this is, I believe, one of the key factors, one of the key forces, which is likely to continue to shape the rise of an organization like ISIS. Because over the last few years we have seen arms, money, ideas, men and women flowing to and from the Middle East to join organizations like ISIS. And this radicalization is feeding ISIS, which in turn has shaped not only the geopolitics of the region, but has in fact altered some of the borders. Now, I've been arguing that the only way to stem the tide of the rise of an organization like ISIS is to tackle the actual ideology. Now, why is that? Because you can have an organization, as Professor Boaz demonstrated, you have an organization like Al-Qaeda, which can be almost conclusively defeated militarily as it was in Iraq in 2008, but because you did not tackle the underlying ideological basis for the justification of such organization, it morphs into something much more dangerous, something like ISIS. And given the lack of political will at the moment to tackle it using military force, our priority should be to tackle the ideological basis and limit the ideas of this organization spreading. Now, what is it that attracts youth from all over the globe? And altogether, United Nations estimates, it's almost over 100 countries, Muslim youth and in fact non-Muslims are going off to join an organization like ISIS. And there's been a number of cases of non-Muslims from the United States and from Europe that are basically just turning up at the door of ISIS and wanting to join in. Now, I believe there's multiple reasons, and as one analyst said, there are as many reasons as there are radicals. Every single radical has its own cocktail of reasons and cocktails of ideas as to why they want to join this organization. So there's been a number of studies done as to try to figure out the motivation of these individuals that are leaving their comfortable lifestyles in the West and going off to this war zone. And the number of factors, from social economic factors, identity politics, alienation, and these are all, I believe, exacerbating factors, and the fundamental reason is actually the ideology. Now, why is it that young people actually want to join a radical organization like ISIS? Now, I'll go through some of the reasons I believe. First of all, an organization like ISIS, these radical networks, they offer instant redemption. Now, you look at the makeup of these individuals that are leaving the UK and France and Belgium and so on. Most of them have a very similar kind of background and profile. Most of them have experienced alienation. Most of them have had a history of petty crime, been in and out of prison, petty drug dealers, car thefts, etc., etc. And what happens is that if you have a history of petty crime, you can be instantly redeemed if you come and join ISIS and join the army of God. So it's instant redemption. Your slate is wiped clean. You are now working in the name of God. And it's the same reasons why young people in LA will go off and join gangs and do horrible things which they will not do individually, but they will do as a collective. It's because they simply want to belong to something larger than they are. There's also the sense of adventure. You look at some of these videos, you see the young men from Europe, driving in their jeeps at 50 miles an hour through the desert with their guns blaring, and it's just like almost like a video game. It's a sense of adventure. So if you're in Europe and you're on benefits, you're on social welfare, or you've got a menial job, why not just leave it and join this great adventure and do God's work at the same time? There's also the aspect of the whole sex slaves, and I've written about this extensively, that many of them are just sexually frustrated. And so why not go off and, instead of going to clubs and pubs and trying to get speed date, why not just go off and get yourself some sex slaves, and it's all good. And there's also one aspect that we don't actually see much of the West, is the utopian image that's offered by an organisation like ISIS. Now, we've all seen the propaganda, which is extremely sophisticated. You see the beheading videos, you see the other atrocities, the bombing videos and so on. But it's also literally dozens upon dozens, hundreds upon hundreds of other videos which we don't get to see in the West. And those are videos that are offering a utopian vision. These are videos of life under ISIS, fun fairs and carnivals and competitions and family days out and picnics and everything else. Stuff that we would consider in the West as just being normal family stuff. But there's tons of those videos, and those are the videos that we don't see, but they're aimed directly at the target market. It's a happy family life, living under the caliphate, nice security, everybody's happy. And those are the videos of a utopian lifestyle under the ISIS rule. And there's also the factor that's very, very important, which was touched upon by the previous speaker, is the success of ISIS. Why on earth would you, if you want to overthrow Bashar al-Assad and fight tyranny and fight oppression, why would you go off and join the Free Syrian Army, who do not pay you well, who are not well equipped and are marginalised? The most important ingredient for success is success itself, and ISIS has demonstrated success time and time again. So if you're a young radical and you want to join an extremist organisation, you will go to the one that's going the best equipped, the best organised, and that pays you the best. Success breeds success. But what I want to focus on today is the ideological aspect, is the underlying ideology. Where are all these ideas coming from? You can speak to Muslims throughout the globe, 1.2 billion Muslims, and they will all tell you that this ideology is completely alien to Islam. So where are these ideas actually coming from? Where is the justification coming from? And the answer is relatively quite simple, and some of the previous speakers in the previous sessions touched upon it. This is all based on Wahhabist ideology, which emerged over the last 100, 200 years. And I'll just give you a very, very quick background of what I'm talking about. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was a cleric in what is today modern-day Saudi Arabia. He basically had decided that Islam had become contaminated, and he went from village to village to cleanse the faith, cleanse it of all the innovations. So he literally went from village to village, slaughtering people, destroying shrines, destroying mosques, killing Shias, etc., to cleanse the faith. He met up with an individual who he partnered with, Muhammad ibn Saud. And Ibn Saud and Abdul Wahhab basically made a deal that he will provide him with religious legitimacy. In exchange, that he will basically make Wahhabism the official state doctrine of this modern state that he was founding called Saudi Arabia. Now, Wahhabism, like many cults, and it's essentially a cult within Islam. There is no other way to describe it. It is a cult within Islam. Would have remained a footnote in history. And cults come and go in all faiths, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Judaism, cults come and go. But there was a single factor which ensured that it got propelled onto the global stage, and that was the discovery of oil. This gave the Saudi government, the Saudi authorities and the Wahhabi clerics literally billions upon billions of dollars to propagate their ideas throughout the globe. And in one study, it's estimated they spend about $2 to $3 billion a year through their charities and through their embassies promoting these ideas. Now, what does Wahhabism teach? Wahhabism teaches anti-Semitism. It teaches misogyny. It teaches that interacting with non-Muslims, you should only do so in cases of necessity. So basically it lays the intellectual foundations for these extremist organizations, and it is then a very slippery slope to go from that, when you have already otherized the majority of the world's population, to then go and say that, look, you must now do your duty and cleanse the faith and clear out these people. Now you have to make a complete distinction here between Wahhabism, which lays the intellectual foundations, to jihadism. Now there's a distinction. Jihadism is the offshoot of Wahhabism. That teaches violence against Muslim rulers, whereas original Wahhabism doesn't. Violence against Muslim rulers to overthrow them. It teaches that offensive jihad is permitted, not just defensive. It teaches that martyrdom operations, suicide operations, are legitimate, which are in fact completely forbidden in all traditional Islamic texts. Any sort of suicide is completely forbidden. And it also teaches that violence against civilians is permitted. So jihadism is an offshoot of Wahhabism. Now if you look at the mechanics of radicalization in terms of how does an individual actually go from being a young Muslim youth in the West to actually becoming a terrorist, the most extensive study done was by Mark Sageman, a behavioral psychologist at the CIA, and it's essentially a four-step process. It is usually when a young individual reacts to the suffering of other Muslims around the globe with moral outrage. So a young Muslim will look around and ask himself that why is it that when I look around the globe, it is only Muslims that are suffering? You know, whether it's in Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia, Chechnya, Somalia, Sudan, Kashmir, Palestine, anywhere I look, it is just Muslims that are suffering. He will then interpret that suffering as a war between Islam and the West. It's very black and white. There's Darul Harb, Darul Islam, and Darul Harb, the house of war, and the house of Islam. He will then associate that suffering with his own experience, Islamophobia, discrimination, racism, or even the inability to get a job despite having the correct qualifications. And the fourth step is when he or she seeks out a radical network that then cocoon him or her in an self-enforcing intellectual environment, propagating these views even further. But the tipping point that comes from being a radical to a terrorist is when he or she starts to believe that violence against civilians is justified. Now, until we tackle this basic ideology, and I've been working on this and I have given presentations on this throughout the globe, most people are aware, you know, even the most senior policy makers in Washington and Brussels and elsewhere, they're all fully aware of exactly what's going on here, but they're simply unable or unwilling to do anything to offend the Saudi government, who is propagating these Wahhabist extremist ideas, simply because they do not want to offend the Saudi government. But until we tackle this basic misunderstanding against Muslims and make a complete distinction between mainstream traditional Orthodox Islam and this cult movement of Wahhabism, we will not get very far. You know, I've been here for the last couple of days. On a number of occasions, we had a dinner last night and the same views were articulated by an individual saying, look, we simply cannot understand the behaviour of the international community when it comes to the state of Israel. You know, why is it that they have such a low and negative opinion of Israel when we are the only democracy in the region? Here the Muslims can live and practice their faith much better than they can anywhere else around the region. We are surrounded by barbaric and backward regimes, but despite that, we still have the most negative opinion. And the reason for that is that because the state of Israel is only viewed in the international community through the prism of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And that is the reality. You know, outside the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, nobody really cares of what goes on in Israel or what goes on in the region. This is the only thing that they see. And the only spokesperson you have for the state of Israel is Netanyahu. He is Netanyahu who says one day that, look, I will never allow a Palestinian state to be formed. And then a week later, he's elected the Prime Minister. So this is reciprocating the views of the people of Israel, despite the fact that somebody told me yesterday that 70% of the people in Israel support the two-state solution. But this is not what's going out there. In the same way, you know, Muslims are also frustrated that you have this small cult movement of Wahhabism that has essentially hijacked their entire narrative, their entire image around the globe. And until we tackle this extremist element, this extremist cult, spreading these ideas and laying the foundations for these ideas, you know, we will not be able to stop the expansion of organizations like ISIS. And I'll just finish off with a very short, very quick story, just to give you an indication of the spread of these Wahhabist ideas. I set up a very, very small charity with one of my friends in Bosnia in 2003. The first time I went there, And we were sponsoring students to come to Europe to undertake postgraduate education and go back to Bosnia, and to create a skilled workforce. And every year that I went to Bosnia, I realized that the first time I went to Bosnia, every institution we came across and everybody we met, they were literally begging us for money, because they had just come out of this war and they had dilapidated buildings and institutions that needed funding. But I realized that as the years went on, they were less and less interested in our money. And the reason why is because the Saudis had turned up. Saudis had turned up in this small village and built a $2 million mosque, gave scholarships to all the male students, who then went to Saudi to study and came back and had jobs for life paid for by the Saudi government. Then the whole environment in those villages started to change. Young men, Caucasian young men started wearing the long flowing Saudi robes. Girls started wearing the face veil. And this is the ideology, of Wahhabism that is being spread with those huge petrodollars. And until we're able to tackle that, and until policymakers are able to step up to the plate, this problem is going to continue. Thanks so much for listening.